Do you consider yourself to be a health-conscious eater? I do. Let me tell you about what I had for supper last night. I had aged organic milk tossed on a bed of seasoned tomato puree and spread on top of oven-baked whole wheat. In other words, I had this. Yeah, I had pizza. I like pizza. You know, pizza, it's the only food I know of that tastes great and it comes with an edible handle. What a win, right? Pizza, it's a good thing. And so is work. Today we are going to conclude with this series, God at Work. Typically at the Ridge, we teach through the books of the Bible. We're coming off a long series teaching through the New Testament letter to James, and in August we're going to begin a new series teaching through the book of 1 Kings, really zeroing in on the life of Solomon. But between those two series, we're taking a few weeks to look at work, God at work, because we spend a whole lot of time doing it, and the Bible has a lot to say about it. So today, let's start where God starts. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. First verse in the entire Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now I'm going to guess that you know this verse. You've heard this verse. You're already familiar with this verse. I'm going to ask you to, just for a moment, to think a little bit about this. See, God, this is God. He has the power. He has the capacity to do anything that he wants to do. So what is it that God chooses to do? Verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's significant. God's not sitting up on a throne listening to harp music. He is creating. He's working. The very first image that we get of God, it's not as a philosophical abstract, higher power. It's a creator at work. And it's not just in Genesis 1:1. He's quite consistent. Not only does God create, the Bible teaches that he later enters in to what he has created. God, he comes to this earth. That's Jesus. We say, well, why? What did he do while we were here? Well, perhaps you're familiar with the ministry of Jesus. And maybe you're familiar with the teaching of Jesus, and maybe you're familiar with the cross of Jesus, but do you realize that he didn't begin any of that until he was age 30? So, well, what was he doing for the first 30 years? Our God came to this earth. He spent the first 30 years swinging a hammer as a carpenter. Jesus spent the majority of his life on earth laboring, working. I think one of the things that God is doing in that is showing us work, well, it's not bad. Work, it's not evil. Work isn't part of the punishment. Work, it has been flawed by sin. And work, it's not always easy, but it is good. It's designed by God to give us meaning. It's designed by God to give us purpose. You and I, we have been created in the image of a God who creates, who works, who gets his hands dirty. We are designed to use our abilities to create value on this earth, to plant and build and organize and heal and invent ways to bless people and make the earth flourish. This can be lived out through a whole bunch of different fields. Business and government and media, through social services, through healthcare, through education. A lot of options. But something happened. Well, the other day I was hungry, so I went to our deep freeze, opened it up, and there's frozen pizza. I pull that thing out. Do you have a favorite brand of frozen pizza? Well, this, maybe DiGiorno's, or maybe Tombstone or Red Baron. Well, the one I pulled out happened to be Totino's. Not on the top of my list, but it was available. So I stick this thing, I open up the box, and as I open up the box, I noticed something. I noticed there was something green on the pizza, and I thought, I don't remember getting a vegetable pizza. So I looked a little closer and noticed that wasn't a green spice. That was actually a spot of mold. And there wasn't a little, there was a lot. Now, I consider myself to be pretty flexible when it comes to pizza toppings. You know, I'm okay with onions. I'm okay with pineapple. I'm even okay with peppers. But I draw the line at fungi. No. That pizza, it was literally decomposing. See, sometimes, here's what can happen. Good things can go bad. We see this in a lot of areas in our life. Well, same thing happens and can happen with work. We've been talking about work for several weeks, about how God designed it and created it so we could help and we could add values to others. Well, we also need to recognize work can go bad. According to the United States Department of Labor, the average American works 49 hours a week. So 49 hours a week, well, that is not the exception. That is the norm. Americans tend to work 350 more hours each year than Europeans. And for us, it's not just the hours in the workplace. I mean, our offices have no walls. We are constantly plugged in. We've got phones and laptops and Wi-Fi and cell power. It doesn't stop. The average American gets a form of digital message every 11 minutes. And then there's this guy, Thomas Edison. Let's get lit. I don't think that means today what it meant back then, right? The phrase has changed a little bit. Thomas Edison, I want you to think about this for a little bit because, you know, the light bulb, that thing changed the world. Before there was a light bulb, do you know how many hours the average person got of sleep each night? 10 hours. Today, you know how many hours the average person gets of sleep a night? 6.7. That's 3 hours and 20 minutes less. You know, I remember when I was growing up, hearing my grandparents talk about the old days. And they would say things like, oh, well, when we were your age, we used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning because we had to go and milk the cows. And I'm thinking, well, how did you do that? How did you sustain that? 4 o'clock in the morning, how does that work? Well, I'll tell you how it worked. They went to bed at 7 because that's when the sun went down. You can only burn a candle for so long. Right? It's like, well, hey, what do you want to do tonight? Well, the sun's gone down. It's getting dark. How about we get some sleep? Craziest idea ever. People used to go to bed when the sun went down. Artificial light has changed generations of old rhythms of rest. You and I, on average, get 3 hours and 20 minutes less sleep than human beings have throughout all of history. And studies show this is not good for us. They point to increased levels of irritability, increased levels of depression and anxiety, mental exhaustion. You see, many people have a general sense of fatigue that they have just learned to live with and accept as normal. We say, man, I am so grateful for coffee and energy drinks and Red Bull. It gets me going. Less sleep, not taking a day off can be responsible for low-grade anxiety. It can be responsible for the distance that we feel from God. It can be responsible for the distance that we feel from one another. It can even be responsible for the distance we feel from ourselves. There can be a disconnect between us and our own soul. There is a better way. from the very beginning of history, God, he didn't just tell us about this better way. He shows us. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Anybody know what the Hebrew word for rest is? You've heard it. It's Sabbath. Sabbath. Maybe you're thinking, well, I've heard of that. Isn't that a big fancy word that means eliminate all forms of enjoyment? In generations past, that seemed to be the way that word functioned, as a big old no. No swimming, no shopping, no gardening, no recreating. If you were having fun, you were probably doing something wrong. Well, in our day, that pendulum has shifted to the opposite extreme. And the tendency today is just to completely ignore it. And that's a problem. That's a problem because Sabbath rest, this isn't just a nice recommendation from God. Sabbath rest is actually one of his 10 commandments. Here it is, Exodus 20, verses 8 through 10. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. See, God, he knew that Sabbath rest, that it was so important, he put it right in the 10 commandments. If you're not taking some time off, if you're not Sabbathing, then you are breaking one of the 10 commandments. There was a word that the Bible uses for that. Sin. You ever think about it that way? Because I tend to think, oh, well, this one's not that big a deal. This isn't adultery, and this isn't murder, and this isn't drunkenness. This is just not taking a day off from work. Sin? Sin? Isn't that word a little bit too strong? Well, did you know that God does something with the fourth commandment that he doesn't do with any of the other 9? He gives us a reason. The other 9, he doesn't explain why. He just lists them off. This one, number 4, this is the only one where God says, I'm going to let you know why. And I imagine that's because he thought, well, they're going to struggle with this one. I better explain it. I'll give them the reason. I'll give them the why for the Sabbath. Here it is. It's the next verse, verse 11. He explains it. He says, For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. After creation, I imagine that there was a whole lot more for God to do. But we see the Lord God Almighty, the one who has unlimited resources, unlimited power, the Lord God Almighty, he paused. He rested. He stopped working. See, God, he did what you and I, what we don't tend to do. We tend to work till we're tired, till we're burned out, till we're exhausted. And then, when our health tanks, we say, man, I'm going to take a day off. That's not the way that God does it. Rather, rest is something that God has built in to the rhythm of creation. It's something that he has designed for our lives. We can stop. And the work, it won't go away. It will still be there available for you to get at the next day. See, God, He built a pattern. God, He built a rhythm. God, He built a cadence into every human being. The universe was created with a certain grain to it. And when God tells us how His universe works, you and I, we are free to ignore that. But if we do, we're the ones who are going to lose. If we go against the grain, you eventually end up with splinters. Let me get at it this way. Have you ever seen this, the low battery icon on your phone? When you see that, you ever see that and like panic? You're like, oh man, it's only 4 o'clock and I'm at 10%. I'm doomed. You and I, in many ways, have been built and designed and created like that phone. We have a limited battery life. You know, the things we're doing, they may not be bad, and they may not be evil, but when we put them all together, well, they become overwhelming. Life can get so full of good things that it's no longer good. You and I have been designed to only handle so much. You've seen how this plays out. Overloaded people, at some point, they break down. At some point, they fail. Fail at work, fail at marriage, fail at parenting. In order to maximize your life, you have to recharge your battery. That's what this is about. Fourth commandment, Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Maybe you hear this and you're like, okay, Mike, I know that. I know the 10 Commandments. I know the fourth commandment. I'm aware of the Sabbath. I understand that's in the Bible. I've heard that. This isn't new. Here's what I'd really like to know. I'd like to know, well, what does that practically mean for my life today? Does Sabbath mean, well, I need to create a period of time, a 24-hour period of time where I just do nothing? No. I don't think that's what God's getting at here. I think the original spirit of this commandment, well, it's to detach from our vocation for a period of time. If it meant doing nothing, parents, you wouldn't stand a chance. You could never live this one out. Say, okay, well, does it have to be a literal 24-hour period? I mean, does it have to be a certain day of the week? Well, my answer to that is no. Look at me. I'm not exactly Sabbathing up here. I mean, I like you guys, but this is the one day of the week that I actually have to work. Is there a list? Give me a list. You know, what are the rights and wrongs? What are the do's and don'ts? What are the regulations and the rules with the Sabbath? There is no such list in the Bible. And I think that's very intentional. God doesn't get into that level of detail, and I think He does that on purpose, because what we see throughout history, when people have tried to come up with these lists in the past, it always got legalistic. So here's how we're going to work an application today. I'm not going to give you a list. If you're waiting for it, it's not going to come. We're not going to come and say, hey, here's things you can do. Here's things you can't do if you really want to adhere to the Sabbath. No, rather, we're going to do this. Guidelines. You're intelligent. You're smart. So I'm just going to lay out 2 guidelines that I see in here in the Bible, and then you can kind of say, well, how does that work in my life? Guideline number 1, when it comes to the Sabbath, well, it's this. If you look like that after the Sabbath, you've missed it. Okay? Sabbath. It's a time to be refreshed emotionally and spiritually and physically, mentally. So if you can find things to do that what refreshes you, find things to do that restores you, that renews you, and that's not going to be the same activity for everybody. We're going to have different things that bring us refreshment. We have to ask ourselves the question, what is it that rejuvenates me? Identify that and then build that into the rhythm of your life. Sabbath. That's the first guideline. Here's the second guideline. Does it connect you with God? And that's important, because you can take a break and you can just sit in a recliner. You can sit on the beach. You could do nothing. That's not Sabbathing. God is saying, well, it needs to connect with me, because the true source of rest and renewal, well, it's when we connect with Him. And that's just not my opinion. That's what Jesus flat out taught. Jesus said these words, Matthew 11, verse 28. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That was a pretty profound statement back in the day. Jesus was making a declaration. Jesus, He was saying, I want you to know who I am. I am the Sabbath. Jesus was declaring, you know this Sabbath commandment, you know this principle that you've been taught for centuries, that's me. You will find the fulfillment of the Sabbath in me. He's the Sabbath. He's the source. He is what we need. See, we can get so busy with life and good things in life that what can happen is we can forget, we can lose our perspective. He says we need to have a Sabbath where we're reconnected to Him, to be reminded who He is, to be reminded of what He's done, to be reminded of what it is that He is still doing, to remember the cross, to celebrate the resurrection, to think about the ways of God, the teachings of God, the promises of God, the things of God. Because when we do that, it will strengthen our faith. It will renew our hope. It'll give us a new and a fresh perspective. Well, the people of God in the Old Testament, the people of Israel, and then the people of God in the New Testament, the church, well, they have always felt that this Sabbathing and connecting with God is always best accomplished together in the temple or the synagogue or the church, where we can gather and sing praise, listen to His teachings, where we can pray, where we can support one another, where we can encourage one another, where we can care for one another and be renewed spiritually in the presence of God and His people. So how about you? As you hear these words from the Bible, how about you? Do you do this? Do you Sabbath? Is that something that's built into the rhythm of your life? Do you join with others in corporate worship? Do you enjoy family and friends? Do those things go on the calendar first, or am I always trying to squeeze those things in with the time that's left over? The fourth commandment: take control of your life. The fourth commandment: take control of your schedule. You can. You can. You really can. We live in a culture that does not encourage Sabbath. We may need to trust. Might come down to that. We may need to just simply trust that God's commandments for us are good. Well, let's end where we began. Genesis 1:1. Read this with me. Join me. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The very first teaching in the entire Bible is the image of God at work, creating. God's intent is for every follower of Jesus to see our vocation as a part of our spiritual life, to integrate God into all areas of our life. And Sabbath reminds us, well, of this. That thing needs to be recharged. We all have a limited battery life. Sabbathing It's built into the very rhythm of creation. It's how you've been designed by God for good. For many of us, the greatest danger in our spiritual life, it's not that we're going to deny God. It's not that we're going to disown our faith. The greatest danger for most of us in our spiritual life is that we will become so distracted, so rushed, so busy, so preoccupied that we sideline God. That we settle for a mediocre version of life where we're not in tune and we're not in touch with Him, where we just skim through the surface of life, not experiencing the deeper, richer dynamics. If you want to maximize your life, you got to recharge your battery. Sabbath.